Hello, everyone. I'm Billy.
And I'm Kamraun. Welcome to the Horse Frog Podcast, home of your two favorite professional digressors and the creators of the Malazan Brotherhood.
And today we will be discussing Book 2, Chapter 10 of Deadhouse Gates, a novel in the Malazan Books of the Fallen. And this is part 1 of our coverage of this chapter.
This podcast series is intended to be a companion to reading or listening to the books set in the Malazan universe. It's not a book review, and it is most definitely not intended to be a replacement to reading the books. Both Billy and I know this to be the best fantasy story ever written and want to share our love of the series with you.
We will be covering the events of the books in a linear fashion. There will be spoilers for those that have not read the books. We will try not to spoil anything prior to us covering that portion of the respective books, but knowing me and my big mouth, I'm probably going to spoil it some, but you know what? I haven't done it yet, so no apologies. No apologies yet.
You've been holding true to your word, and you haven't messed up yet. A quick warning, today's episode contains descriptions of extreme violence. Listener discretion is advised.
And our show is listener supported, and if you'd like to support us, we'd really appreciate that. And you can do so by visiting our Patreon link at our website, horsefrogproductions.com. Currently, we're posting ad-free episodes on Patreon weekly.
Also, we'd really like to hear from you. Send any feedback or comments to contact@horsefrogproductions.com. All right, Chapter 10, Part 1. The chapter begins with an excerpt. Quote, "It is one thing to lead by example with half a dozen soldiers at your back. It is wholly another with 10,000, end quote. And this is from the life of Dasim Ultor. By Duiker. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay.
Because it really is two different forms of leadership.
Yes.
On the smaller scale, you only need to influence a small number of people directly. But when you're scaling that out across an army, you have to build leaders that can build leaders all the way down the chain of command. So what do you think about that?
I agree wholeheartedly. Out of the two, if I had to take my pick, I'd take the smaller group because it's a lot easier to lead a smaller group than a big group. Because I can't, because of that knowledge, I'm not good at knowing. You have to build people you can trust that are going to build people that they can trust under them. That's, like you said, that's a difficult. That's a level I don't understand. I can lead by example, but leading a group, that's a lot different.
Yeah, it's like a fifth order thing that you have to get to, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to train your trusted people below you, but then you're basically replicating yourself down the chain.
Yes.
And they have to be able to replicate that multiple levels deep.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's ultimately how you create a legacy.
Yeah, true. I agree. Well, it's a lot of work.
It's not that dissimilar from being the paterfamilias, if you will.
Right.
If you're going to build a legacy, your children, you're trying to train them to continue.
I'm still recovering from
carrying your traditions.
Still recovering from that one. Shots fired. That was great, man. Oh, gracious. Have you just seen that recently, or you just had to bring that up? Because that's a really good point.
No, man, I love Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh, my word, what a fantastic movie.
It's one of the greatest movies.
Yes. It's magnificent. You know what I love about that movie is KP and I watched this probably within the past 3 or 4 months. And the funny thing about it is it just shows me what a dreadful actor George Clooney is and how much I don't care. I just love George Clooney. He's just not a real good actor, though.
He's good at playing that character. He's good at playing the idiot character, but also the good-looking suave character. But they're both George Clooney.
Yes. Oh, they're both perfect Clooney. Because I always think about he plays a combination of both. And what is it? The burn after reading?
After reading. Yes, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Oh, good gracious.
Directed by the same people.
Yes,
right?
Coen Brothers, what do you want? They get George Clooney for George Clooney. They know what they want.
All right, moving along. It had been a week since Duiker came upon the trail left by the refugees from Karen to Posse. In the midst of the dry season, they had been driven south to place further strain on Coltane's stumbling city in motion. Day after day had rolled by, yet Duiker still could not catch up with the fist in his train. The few times he had come within sight of the massive dust cloud, Rello's Tithanzi outriders had prevented Duiker from getting any closer. Coltane kept his forces moving, driving for the Sakala River. Duiker thought, and from there, does he make a stand, his back to the ancient ford? The detritus from the refugees diminished, yet grew more poignant. Tiny graves humped the old encampments. The short bones of horses and cattle lay scattered about, An oft-repaired but finally abandoned wagon axle marked one departure point, the rest of the wagon dismantled and taken for spares. The sites of past skirmishes revealed another story. Amidst the naked, unrecovered bodies of Tethanzi horse warriors were shattered Wiccan lances, the heads removed. Everything that could be reused had been stripped from their bodies. Dead horses were dragged away, leaving swaths of blood-matted grass in their wake. Duiker was well past astonishment at anything he saw. Like the Tethanzi tribesmen he'd occasionally exchanged words with, he'd begun to believe that Coltane was something other than human, that he had carved his soldiers and every refugee into unyielding avatars of the impossible. Yet for all that, there was no hope for victory. Chemist Rello's apocalypse consisted of the armies of 4 cities and a dozen towns, countless tribes, and a vast peasant horde. A battle at the Sakala River was taking shape, an annihilation. Duiker's clothes were reduced to rags. Tethanzi riders knew him on sight and paid him little heed apart from a distant wave. Every 2 or 3 days, a troop would join him, pass him bundles of food, water, and feed for the horse. In some ways, he had become their icon, his journey symbolic. Duiker felt pangs of guilt at that, yet accepted the gifts with genuine gratitude, for they kept him and his horse alive. Nonetheless, his faithful mount was wearing down. More and more each day, Duiker led the animal by the reins. I just realized that virtually every branch of this story has an epic steed as a component. We have Kalam, Fiddler, and now Duiker with these storied horses.
I agree. And I think, something that just dawned on me earlier this week when I was trying to think of a description of these books in particular, why they're such a different type of fantasy, I think I've come to realize is they are a military fantasy. I've never found a way to label these before, but I think that's about the closest thing I can get. I've got a lot of military stuff in it. And of course, being a military that relies on any kind of transport, these horses become quite the characters in and of themselves, because you and I love all these great horses, man. Duiker's has got a great horse too. They're all self-sacrificing horses.
Yeah. And to your point about the military fantasy, I guess that's the influence of Glenn Cook and the Black Company.
Okay. Yeah.
That's kind of the thematic style that inspired Erikson for the military aspects of the story.
I think that's one of the reasons I like it so much, and I guess it's what makes it so different for me, because I've just started watching season 2 of Wheel of Time is out, and I've been catching up on that. And that's, while an entertaining show, I mean, it follows so many familiar tropes, and I get no tropes hardly from Erikson. Has his own tropes. He creates his own world with his own stuff that you and I call out, like the spitting and the horses and some other crazy stuff that is very much distinctly Erikson. But yeah, I was trying to figure out a way to explain this to somebody and what's the difference is, and that's the only description I could come up why it is different. It's still your typical fantasy, but it's got a lot of military, because all of our great stuff happens with the military. And we got so many great characters here that are military that we love.
Yeah, I'm really biased towards those characters. All of my favorite characters, I can't say all of my favorite characters. Yeah. The majority of my favorite characters are the Marines that we encounter.
Absolutely.
At the lowest level, really.
Yeah.
The relationships that they have amongst each other, the way they treat each other, it's like a family.
It is.
Sometimes they hate each other, sometimes they're bickering at each other, but in the end, they're there for each other.
That's right. They've got each other's back.
Dusk approached. The distant dust cloud continued to march on, until Duiker was certain that Coltane's vanguard had reached the river. The Fist would insist that the entire train drive on through the night to the encampment that the vanguard was even now preparing. If Duiker was to have any chance of rejoining them, it would have to be this night. He vaguely knew of the ford from maps. The Sakala River averaged 500 paces in width, flowing north to the Karas Sea, a small village squatted between 2 hills a few hundred paces south of the ford itself. Duiker seemed to remember something about an old oxbow as well. At dusk, Duiker climbed back into the saddle. A small band of Tethanzi outriders rode a ridge half a mile to the north. Duiker judged that he was at least a league from the river. The patrols of horse warriors would increase the closer he approached. He had no plan for dealing with them. Duiker had walked his mount for most of the day, since he would need all that the beast could give him, and was afraid that it would not be enough. He nudged the mare into a trot. The distant Tethanzi paid him no attention, and soon rode out of sight. Duiker's heart thumped as he urged his horse into a canter. A wind brushed his face. Duiker hissed a blessing to whatever god was responsible. The hanging dust cloud ahead began to edge his way. The sky further darkened. A voice shouted a few hundred paces to his left, a dozen Tethanzi horse warriors. Duiker saluted them with a raised fist. One of them yelled, "With the dawn, old man! It is suicide to attack now!" Another yelled, "Ride to Rello's camp! Northwest, old man! You are heading for the enemy lines!" Duiker waved their words away and gestured like a madman. He rose slightly in the saddle, whispered into the mare's ear, squeezed gently with his knees. Her head ducked forward and the strides lengthened. Reaching the crest of a low hill, Duiker finally saw what was arrayed before him. The encampment of the Tethanzi Lancers lay ahead and to his right, 1,000 or more hide tents. Mounted patrols moved in a restless line beyond the tents, protecting the camp from the Malazan forces dug in at the ford. To the left of the Tethanzi camp spread 20,000 makeshift tents, the peasant army. Outlying pickets consisted of entrenchments facing the river. Between the two encampments there was a corridor, no more than 2 wagons wide, running down the sloping floodplain to meet Coltane's earthen defenses. Duiker rode at full gallop and angled his horse down the corridor. The Tethanzi outriders behind him had not pursued, though the warriors patrolling the encampment now watched him, converging, but without obvious concern. Yet. As he cleared the inside edge of the tribe's camp on his right, then the peasants' sea of tents on his left, he saw raised earthworks, orderly rows of tents, solidly manned pickets. The horde had additional protection. Duiker saw 2 banners, Sialk and Hisar, regular infantry. Helmed heads had turned, eyes drawn to the sound of his horse's hooves, and now the alarm shouts of the Tethanzi riders. The mare was straining. Coltane's pickets were 500 paces ahead. Duiker heard horses gaining in pursuit. Figures appeared on the Malazan bulwarks and readied their bows. Duiker prayed for quick-witted minds among the soldiers he rode toward. He cursed as he saw the bows raised, then drawn back. In Malazan, Duiker bellowed, "Not me, you bastards!" The bows loosed. Arrows sped unseen in the night. Horses screamed behind him. His pursuers were drawing rein. More arrows flew. Duiker risked one backward glance and saw the Tethanzi scrambling to withdraw out of arrow range. Thrashing horses and bodies lay on the ground. He slowed the mare to a canter, then a trot as he approached the earthworks. She was lathered, her limbs far too loose, her head sagging. Duiker rode into the midst of Wiccans from the Weasel clan. They stared at him in silence. As he glanced around, Duiker felt himself in well-suited company. The Wiccans had the look of specters, their faces drawn with an exhaustion to match his own. Beyond the Weasel clan's encampment were military-issue tents and 2 banners, the Hisari Guard who had remained loyal, and a company whose standard Duiker did not recognize, apart from a central stylized crossbow signifying Malazan Marines. Would that be a crossbow like that on the center of the Horse Frog Productions shield?
Oh,
wink, wink.
I know it to be an exact representation of the Horse Frog banners, the Horse Frog Productions media banner. So,
Yes. On a more serious note, this entire sequence with Duiker racing into the camp with the Tethanzi at his back is one of my core memories from this book. It always stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, his ride, so much of this book is core memory, isn't it? It's just all such an intense thing.
It's a very dense book. I had forgotten a lot of it, but there are like main plot points, many of them, probably at least 10, 15 of them that stick with me. This was one of them.
Yeah, I agree. This is our journey into liking Duiker so much as, because he's a character we're supposed to identify with since he's the observer here. And we want him to be okay. So there's a lot we understand that there's a lot riding on him. So I enjoy our getting to know him.
Yeah, there's also the additional component of the horse that he spent so much time with. And then that final run for that horse. He's talking about she's super lathered. The legs are getting loose. Like that's generally when they just flop over and it's done.
Exactly. It's right when you run to death kind of point. Yeah.
Hands reached up to help Duiker from the saddle. Wiccan youths and elders gathered around. A soothing murmur of voices rose in concern for the mare. An old man gripped Duiker's arm and said, "We will tend to this brave horse, stranger." Duiker was flooded with sorrow as he said, "I think she's finished." He thought, "Gods, I'm tired." The old man shook his head and said, "Our horsewives are skilled in such things. She shall run again. Now, an officer comes. Go." A captain from the unknown company of Marines approached. He was Falari, indicated by long, wavy, fiery red hair and beard. The captain said, "You rode in your saddle like a Malazan, yet dressed like a damned Dosai. Explain yourself and be quick about it." Duiker said, "Duiker, Imperial Historian. I've been trying to rejoin this train since it left Hisar. The captain's eyes widened. He said, 160 leagues? You expect me to believe that? Coltane left Hisar almost 3 months ago.
Mm.
Wow, that is a long time to be out there alone trying to catch up with no rest.
Right. And I agree. Wow is right. This is a long ride on a horse, especially you're by yourself, and especially having all this enemy and stuff going, this country going up in flames around you as you're following it, the flames. That's a long time to be out there.
Yeah, and imagine the nervousness of Duiker. At any time, these people around him, these Tithanzi horse warriors or any of the soldiers of the apocalypse could have figured out who he was.
Mhm.
So you would be nervous that whole time too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so. It's like,
Also not knowing what's going on with Coltane.
yeah. Yeah, the only thing you can tell by Coltane and what's going on is the trash left in their wake. You don't really know what's going on. He has what he assumes a knowledge of going on, but he kind of does, but nobody knows Coltane.
There was one additional thing I want to say here. This indicates a significant jump forward in time. 3 months.
Yes.
That he's been chasing Coltane.
This is something I kind of almost gloss over in a way. It's like, oh, it's 3 months out here by yourself. And you're like, 3 months? I didn't, until we sat there and talked about it, it's like it didn't register. That's a quarter of a year, by yourself.
It was a long time.
Yeah. Following and dealing with this stuff. Yeah, that's crazy.
The reason I mentioned that is it's going to also have effects on the other storylines that are going on.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
That's true.
In response to the fact that the captain cannot believe it's been 3 months, Duiker said, I know. Where's Bolt? Has Culp rejoined the 7th? And who in Hood's name are you? The captain said, Lull, captain of the Sialk Marines, Cartheron Wing, Sahul Fleet. Coltane's called a briefing. You'd better come along, historian. As they walked through the encampment, Duiker was appalled at what he saw. Beyond the ragged entrenchments of the Marines was a broad, sloping field with a single roped road running through it. On the right were wagons in their hundreds, their beds crowded with wounded. The wagon wheels were sunk deep in blood-soaked mud. Birds filled the torchlit air and voiced a frenzied chorus. It seemed they had acquired a taste for blood. On the left, the churned field was a solid mass of cattle, shoulder to shoulder, beneath a hovering haze of risen who feasted on the swarms of flies. Ahead, the field dropped away to a strip of marsh bridged by wooden slats. The swampy pools of water gleamed red. Beyond it was a broad, humped-backed oxbow island on which, in crowded mayhem, were encamped the refugees in their tens of thousands. Duiker muttered, Hood's breath. Are we going to have to walk through that? Lull shook his head and gestured toward a large farmhouse on the cattle side of the ford road. He said, There, Coltane's own Crow clan are guarding the south side, along the hills, making sure none of the livestock strays or gets plucked by the locals. There's a village over on the other side. Duiker asked, Did you say Sahul Fleet? Why aren't you with Admiral Nock and Aaron, Captain? Lull grimaced and said, Wish we were. We left the fleet and pulled up in Sialk for repairs. Our transport was 70 years old. Started shipping water 2 hours out from Hisar. The mutiny happened the same night. So we left the ship, gathered up what was left to the local marine company, then escorted the exodus out of Sialk. They approached the sturdy farmhouse. Its foundation was of cut stone, and the walls were split logs, chinked with sun-fired clay. A soldier of the 7th stood guard in front of a solid oak door. He nodded to Captain Lull, then narrowed his eyes on Duiker. Lull said, Ignore the tribal garb. This one's ours. Who's here? The soldier said, Everybody but the Fist, the Warlocks, and the captain of the Sappers, sir. Lull said, Forget the captain. He ain't bothered showing for one of these yet. In typical Sapper fashion.
Yes, absolutely. Well, they got work to do. They got time for meetings.
Yeah. The soldier said, Yes, sir, then thumped a gauntleted fist on the door, then pushed it open. Wood smoke drifted out. Duiker and the captain stepped inside. Bolt and 2 officers of the 7th were crouched at the massive stone fireplace at the room's far end, arguing over what was obviously a blocked chimney. Lull unclipped his sword belt and hung the weapon on a hook by the door. He demanded, What in Hood's name are you building a fire for? Ain't it hot and stinking enough in here? He waved at the smoke. One of the 7th officers turned, and Duiker recognized him as the soldier who'd stood at his side when Coltane and his Wiccans first landed in Hisar. Their eyes met. The officer said, Tog's feet. It's the historian. Bolt straightened and swung around, then grinned. He said, Sormo was right. He'd sniffed you on our trails weeks back. Welcome, Duiker. His legs threatening to give way under him, Duiker sat down in one of the chairs pushed against the wall. He leaned back and said, "Good to see you, Uncle," then winced at his aching muscles. Bolt said, "We were going to brew some herbal tea." His red eyes watered. He had lost weight, his pallor gray with exhaustion. Lull said, "For the love of clear lungs, give it up. What's keeping the fist anyway? I can't wait to hear what mad scheme he's concocted to get us out of this one." Duiker said, "He's pulled it off this far." Lull responded, "Against one army, sure, but we're facing two now." Duiker lifted his head and asked, "Two?" The Wiccan captain said, "The liberators of Kamraun. Can't recall if we were ever introduced. I'm Chened. That's Captain Solmar." Duiker asked, "You're it for the 7th's ranking officers?" Chened grinned and responded, "Afraid so." Captain Solmar grunted, "Not quite. There's the man in charge of the 7th sappers." Duiker said, "The one who never shows at these briefings." Solmar said aye. He looked dour, but Duiker already suspected that the expression was Solmar's favorite. He was dark, short, appearing to have Connie's and Dalhoney's blood in his ancestry. His shoulders sloped as if carrying a lifetime of burdens. Solmar said, "Though why the bastard thinks he's above the rest of us, I don't know. Damn sappers have been doing nothing but repairing wagons and collecting big chunks of stone and getting in the cutter's way." Chened said, "Bolt commands us in the field." Bolt rumbled, "I am the fist's will." There was the sound of horses pulling up outside, the jangle of tack and armor, then the door thumped once and a moment later swung open. Coltane looked unchanged to Duiker's eyes, as straight as a spear, his lean face windburned to the color and consistency of leather, his black feather cape bellying in his wake as he strode into the center of the large room. Behind him came Sormo Inath and half a dozen Wiccan youths who spread out to array themselves haphazardly against the walls and pieces of furniture. That's an important detail. Everyone else is worn down to a nub and showing signs to that effect, while Coltane, the one with the most pressure and responsibility on his shoulders, looks unchanged.
Is this due to the Wiccans' concoctions? They're a red horse instead of the Red Bull kind of stuff?
No, we can't really say too much right now.
Right, that's true.
Sormo walked up to Duiker and held out both hands to grip his wrists. Their eyes met. Sormo said, "Our patience is rewarded. Well done, Duiker." Sormo looked infinitely older. Coltane said, "Rest later, historian," then fixed each person in the room with a slow, gauging study. He said, "I made my command clear," and turned to Bolt. He asked, "Where is the captain of the engineers?" Bolt shrugged and said, "Word was sent. He's a hard man to find." Coltane scowled and said, "Captain Chened, your report." Chened said, 3rd and 5th companies are across the ford digging in. The crossing's about 420 paces, not counting the shallows on both sides, which add another 20 or so. Average depth is 1.5 arm spans. Width is between 4 and 5 most of the way. A few places narrower, a few wider. The bottom's about 2 fingers of muck over a solid spine of rocks. Coltane said, "The foolish dog clan will join your companies on the other side. If the Gurin forces try to take that side of the ford during the crossing, you will stop them." Coltane wheeled to Captain Lull and said, "You and the Weasel clan shall guard this side while the wounded and the refugees cross. I will maintain position to the south, blocking the village road, until the way is clear." Captain Solmar cleared his throat and said, "About the order of crossing, Fist, the Council of Nobles will scream." Coltane said, "I care not. The wagons cross first, with the wounded, then the livestock, then the refugees." With sweat glistening on his brow, Solmar continued, "Perhaps if we split it up more 100 cattle than 100 nobles." Bolt asked, "Nobles? You meant refugees, surely?" Solmar said, "Of course." Captain Lull sneered at Solmar. He said, "Trying to buy favors on both sides, are you? And here I thought you were a soldier of the 7th. Solmar's face darkened. Chened said, "Splitting the crossing would be suicide." Bolt growled aye, and looked at Solmar as if he was a piece of rancid meat. Solmar snapped, "We've a responsibility." Coltane cut him off with a snarled curse. There was silence in the room. From outside came the creak of wagon wheels. Bolt grunted, "Mouthpiece ain't enough." The door opened a moment later and 2 men entered. The one in the lead wore a spotless, light blue brocaded coat. Whatever muscle he'd carried in youth had given way to fat, and that fat had withered with 3 months of desperate flight. With a face like a wrinkled leather bag, he nonetheless projected a coddled air that was now tinged with indignant hurt. The man a step behind him also wore fine clothes, although reduced by dust and sweat to little more than shapeless sacks hanging from his lean frame. He was bald, the skin of his scalp patchy with old sunburn. He squinted at the others with watery eyes, blinking rapidly. These nobles. My dislike for them rivals that of my dislike for Malik Rel.
I agree. I dislike this bunch in particular. There is a comment in Blackadder from the King about arrow fodder. I hope he'd not be joining us on the battlefield. He goes, "Oh no, no, Lord, he'll be with the others." Oh, the arrow fodder, good. I think I could find a place in the arrow fodder group for this bunch real quick.
Yeah, I agree.
They serve no purpose, and they serve no purpose here.
But they are the nobles.
They are the nobles, sir. Yeah, so you can tell we're Americans. We don't care about the nobility. It's like, and it's like, yeah, no, and.
The first nobleman spoke. Word of this gathering reached the council belatedly. Bolt dryly muttered, unofficially, too. The nobleman continued with the barest of pauses. Events such as these are admittedly concerned with military discussions for the most part, and heavens forbid the council involve itself with such matters. However, as representatives of the nearly 30,000 refugees now gathered here, we have assembled a list of issues that we would like to present to you. Lull said, you represent a few thousand nobles, and as such your own hood-damned interests and no one else's, Nethpara. Save the piety for the latrines. Even the name Nethpara gets me mad.
Yeah, I agree. You do.
You know who this guy reminds me of?
Who?
Okay, so in the Boba Fett show, the mayor of, was it Mos Espa that they were in?
Yes.
The Twi'lek that was the assistant for the mayor.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Exactly the same vibe, just infuriating, empty words and platitudes.
Yes.
But this little air of contempt and imperious.
Yeah, arrow fodder.
Yeah. Send them to the front lines.
Heck, I'll even give them a weapon too. You know, it's unlike Enemy at the Gate where the first person gets the gun, the second person gets the ammo. You know, I don't want that. I'll give this guy some ammo to go with his bow. You know.
Mm-hmm. Nethpara did not deign to acknowledge Lull's comments. His gaze held on Coltane, awaiting a reply. Coltane gave no sign that he was prepared to provide one. To Bolt, he said, find the sappers, uncle. The wagons begin crossing in an hour. Bolt slowly nodded. Solmar frowned and said, we were expecting a night of rest. Everyone's dead on their feet. Coltane growled, an hour! The wagons with the wounded first. I want at least 400 across by dawn. Nethpara spoke, please, Fist, reconsider this order of crossing. While my heart breaks for those wounded soldiers, your responsibility is to protect the refugees. More, it will be viewed by many in the council as a grievous insult that the livestock should cross before unarmed civilians of the Empire. My heart breaks for those wounded soldiers. Sure, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, these guys.
He would pave the river with their bodies to not get his feet wet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Lull asked, and if we lose the cattle, I suppose you could spit the orphan children over a fire.
Oh.
Nethpara smiled resignedly and said, yes, the matter of the reduced rations numbers in our list of concerns. We have it on good account that such reductions have not been applied to the soldiers of the 7th. Perhaps a more balanced method of distribution could be considered. It is so very difficult to see the children wither away. Yeah, again, I'm sure his concern is for the poor children.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those... Man, we're gonna Coen Brothers it again. Here we go. That poor woman. It's like that poor woman. It's like that poor woman. It's like, you know, but those poor children.
That's the third movie that we've referenced by them today.
I know it. Well, it's so relevant. They're always so good.
That would be Walter from The Big Lebowski. Having a fit about Bunny Lebowski, right?
Yes. That poor woman, that poor strumpet, you mean? It's like, oh.
Lull's face was red with rage. He said, less meat on their bones, eh? Without well-fed soldiers between you and the Tethanzi, your stomachs will be flopping around your knees in no time. Coltane said, get them out of here. The other nobleman cleared his throat and said, while Nethpara speaks for the majority of the council, his views are not unanimously held. The noble ignored the dark glare Nethpara threw him and continued. I am here out of curiosity, nothing more. For example, these wagons filled with wounded. It seems there are many more wounded than I had imagined. The wagons are veritably crowded, yet there are close to 350 of them. 2 days ago, we were carrying 700 soldiers, using perhaps 175 wagons. 2 small skirmishes have occurred since then, yet we now have twice as many wagons being used to transport the wounded. More, the sappers have been crawling all over them, keeping everyone away, even to the point of discouraging the efforts of the cutters. What precisely is being planned here? There was silence. Duiker saw the 2 captains of the 7th exchange puzzled looks. Solmar's baffled expression was almost comical as his mind stumbled back over the details presented by the old man. Only the Wiccans seemed unaffected. Bolt said, "We have spread the wounded out, strengthened the side walls." The nobleman said, "Ah, yes, so I first concluded. Yet why do those wagons now ride so heavy in the mud?" In an exasperated tone, Nethpara said, "Is this really necessary, Tumlet? Technical nuances may be your fascination, but Hood knows no one else's. We were discussing the council's position on certain vital issues. No permission shall be accorded such digressions." Coltane said, "Uncle." Bolt grinned as he grasped both noblemen by their arms and guided them firmly to the door. He said, "We've a crossing to plan. Digressions unwelcome." No digressions?
I think Bolt just kind of attacked me on a personal, spiritual level there.
Are we not allowed?
We do know the Wiccans to be a no-nonsense bunch, though. So
yes, we'd have to shape up if we were hanging out with them.
Oh, my word. Digressions with those bunch would be very unwelcome, but we're on our own time here, sir. We will digress.
Tumlet tried to continue. "Yet what of the stonecutters and the renderers?" Bolt shouted, "Out, the both of you!" and pushed them forward. Nethpara was wise enough to open the door just in time as Bolt gave them a final shove. The 2 noblemen stumbled outside. At a nod from Bolt, the guard reached in and pulled the door shut. Lull rolled his shoulders beneath the weight of his chain shirt and asked, "Anything we should know, Fist?" After it was clear Coltane wouldn't respond, Chened said, "I'm concerned about the depth of this ford. The crossing's likely to be damn slow. Not that there's much of a current, but with the mud underfoot and 4.5 feet of water, ain't nobody going to cross fast, even on a horse." He glanced at Lull and said, "A fighting withdrawal won't be pretty." Coltane said, "You all know your positions and tasks." Coltane looked to Stormo, and his eyes narrowed as he studied the warlock. Then the children arrayed behind him. He told the officers, "You'll each have a warlock. All communication will be through them." Dismissed. Duiker watched the officers and the children leave until only Bolt, Sormo, and Coltane remained. Sormo conjured a jug seemingly from nowhere and passed it to Coltane, who drank down a mouthful, then passed it to Duiker. The Fist's eyes glittered. He said, "Historian, you've a story to tell us. You were with the 7th mage, Culp. Rode out with him only hours before the uprising. Sormo cannot find the man. Anywhere. Dead?" Duiker truthfully said, "I don't know. We were split up." He downed a mouthful from the jug, then stared at it in surprise. He thought, chilled ale. Where does Sormo get this from? He glanced at the warlock and asked, "You've searched for Culp through your warren?" Sormo crossed his arms and said, "A few times. Not lately. The warrens have become difficult." Bolt said, "Lucky us." Duiker said, "I don't understand." Sormo sighed. "Recall our one ritual, historian? The plague of divers and soul-taken? They infest every warren now, at least on this continent. All are seeking the fabled path of hands. I have been forced to turn my efforts to the old ways, the sorceries of the land, of life spirits and totem beasts. Our enemy, the high mage chemist Rello, does not possess such elder knowledge, so he dares not unleash his magery against us. Not for weeks now." It sounds like a blessing and a curse, doesn't it?
I guess so. But what about the curse part? Do you mean for them not being able to use magic themselves?
Correct.
Yeah, I guess so. But apparently, these Wiccans have some things up their sleeves, though.
They do. Well, I guess they don't really have many high mages. They only had Culp, and he's not there. But, that might have been able to help them in some ways.
It would have, I'm sure.
Coltane said, "Without it, Rello is but a competent commander, not a genius. His tactics are simplistic. He looks upon his massive army and lets his confidence undervalue the strength and will of his opponents." Bolt said, "He don't learn from his defeats either." Duiker held his gaze on Coltane. He asked, "Where do you lead this train, Fist?" Coltane said, "Ubarid." Duiker blinked. He thought, 2 months away at least. He asked, "We still hold that city then?" Silence stretched. Duiker said, "You don't know." Bolt said no, and retrieved the jug from Duiker's hand and took a mouthful. Coltane said, "Now, Duiker, tell us of your journey." Duiker had no intention of explaining his efforts regarding Hebrick Light Touch. He sketched a tale that ran close enough to the truth, however, to sound convincing. He and Culp had ridden to a coastal town to meet some old friends in a marine detachment. Ill luck that it was the night of the mutiny. Seeing an opportunity to pass through the enemy ranks in disguise, gathering information as he went, Duiker elected to ride. Culp had joined the Marines in an effort to sail south to Hisar's harbor. As Duiker spoke, the muted sounds of wagons lurching into motion on the Oxbow Island reached the men. It was loud enough for chemist Rello's soldiers to hear, and rightly guessed that the crossing had begun. Duiker wondered how he would respond. As Duiker began elaborating on what he had observed of the enemy, Coltane cut him off with a raised hand. He muttered, "If all your narratives are as dull, it's a wonder anyone reads them."
Wow. Wow. Nice. Good job, Colton. I don't know that. That's pretty funny.
Duiker smiled and leaned back, then closed his eyes. He said, "Ah, Fist, it's the curse of history that those who should read them never do. Besides, I am tired." Coltane said, "Uncle, find this man a tent and a bedroll. Give him 2 hours. I want him to witness as much of the crossing as possible. Let the events of the next day be written, lest history's lesson be lost to all who follow." Man, Duiker is on the ragged edge and only gets 2 hours of sleep. That's tough. He's an old man, too.
That is true, but it's probably 2 more hours than the Wiccans are getting. So,
true, he should feel lucky.
Yeah, he's got a place to be at least.
Duiker mumbled, 2 hours? I can't guarantee I won't have a blurry recollection, assuming I survive to record the tale. A hand shook Duiker's shoulder. He opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep in the chair. A blanket had been thrown across him. A young corporal stood over him. The corporal said, "Sir, you are to rise now." Every bone ached. Duiker scowled and said, "What's your name, corporal?" The corporal said, "List, sir. 5th Company, sir." Duiker thought, "Oh yes, the one who died in the mock engagements." Yes, the one who probably has CTE from all the times he got knocked out in those engagements.
I'd hope he wouldn't have that here with the Wiccan or Denal healing, but I'm hoping. Well,
oh yeah, that's a good point.
Or including if he survives what's coming too.
Yeah. Only now did the roar from outside reach Duiker's senses. He sat up and exclaimed, "Hood's breath! Is that a battle out there?" Corporal List shrugged and said, "Not yet. Just the drovers and the livestock. They're crossing. There's been some clashes on the other side. The Gurren armies arrived, but we're holding." Duiker flung the blanket covering him aside and stood up. List handed him a battered tin cup and said, "Careful, sir. It's hot." Duiker stared down at the dark brown liquid and asked, "What is it?" List said, "Don't know, sir. Something Wiccan." Duiker took a sip and winced at the scalding, bitter taste. He asked, "Where is Coltane? Something I forgot to tell him last night." List said, "He rides with his Crow clan." Duiker asked, "What time is it?" List said, "Almost dawn." Duiker thought, almost dawn, and the cattle are only starting to cross? He felt himself becoming alert, glanced down again at the drink, and took another sip. He asked, "This is one of Sormo's brews? It's got my nerves jumping." List said, "Some old woman handed it to me, sir. Are you ready?" Duiker asked, "You've been assigned to me, List?" List said, "Yes, sir." Duiker said, "Your first task then, Corporal, is to direct me to the latrine."
Nice.
Yeah, that's nice. They stepped outside to mayhem. Cattle covered the Oxbow Island. A mass of humped backs slowly edged forward to the shouts of drovers. The other side of the Sakala was obscured in clouds of dust that had begun drifting over the river. List gestured toward a trench behind the farmhouse and said, "This way, sir." As they walked, Duiker said, "Dispense with the sirs, and find me a rider. Those soldiers on the other side have some serious trouble heading their way." List said, "Sir?" Duiker stood at the edge of the trench. He hitched back his Talava, then paused and noted, "There's blood in this trench." List said, "Yes, sir. What was that about the other side of the river, sir?" Duiker spoke as he relieved his bladder. He said, "Heard from some Tethanzi outriders. The Semk have come south. They'll be on the Gurren side, I'd guess. That tribe has sorcerers, and their warriors put the fear in the Tethanzi, so you can expect they're a nasty bunch. I'd planned on mentioning it last night, but forgot." A troop of horse warriors passed in front of the house at that moment. Corporal List raced back to intercept them. Duiker finished and rejoined his aide. He slowed. The troop's standard was instantly recognizable. List was breathlessly conveying the message to the commander. Duiker shook off his hesitation and approached. He said, "Baria Citral." The Red Blade commander's eyes flicked to Duiker and went cold. Beside him, his brother Mesker growled wordlessly. Man, Mesker is like a rabid beast, isn't he?
Yeah. I don't remember much about these dudes. I just remember they were surly and they're pretty effective fighters, though, right?
I don't know how much fighting we see them do.
Yeah.
I just know they have a reputation.
They have a reputation for that.
Duiker said, "Seems your luck's held." Barya rumbled, "And yours, but not that white-haired mage. Too bad. I was looking forward to hanging his hide from our banner. This word of the Semp, from you?" Duiker clarified, "From the Tithanzi." Mesker barked a laugh and grinned. He said, "Shared their tents on the way, did you?" He faced his brother and said, "It's a lie." Duiker sighed. "What would be the point of that?" Barya said, "We ride to support the 7th Advanced Picket. We shall pass on your warning." Mesker said, "It's a trap." His attention remained on Duiker as Barya said, "Shut up, brother. A warning is just that. Not a lie, not a trap. If Semp show, we will be ready. If not, then the tale was false. Nothing surrendered." Duiker said, "Thank you, Commander. We're on the same side, after all." Barya growled, "Better late than never." A hint of a smile showed in his oiled beard. He said, "Historian." He said, "Historian," then raised a gauntleted fist and opened it. At the gesture, the troop of Redblades resumed their canter to the ford, Mesker alone flinging a dark glare Duiker's way as he rode past. That's an interesting exchange between Berea and Duiker there. Quite civil, if you ask me. Almost as if Berea likes Duiker. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, I get that feeling too, and it's maybe it's just the mutual respect of the brothers in arms kind of angle, kind of thing here. But yeah, I got the feeling that for some reason, I'm not sure. I think it's Barya. I'm not sure if it's Barya or whatever. Whatever. I think he does like him though. I imagine that is a wave as he's leaving. Kind of he holds his hand up to signal to the troop. But it's like, hey, he uses the signal as a way to say farewell at the same time. Kind of how I see that.
Like a salute?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, very much.
The dawn light lit an impenetrable cloud of dust above the cicala that eased crossways to the faint breeze and descended on the ford itself. The entire crossing was obscured. Duiker grunted, "Nice touch, that." List said, "Sormo. It said he's awakened the spirits of the land and the air, from a sleep of centuries, for even the tribes have left those ways behind. Sometimes you can smell them." Duiker glanced at List and asked, "Smell?" List said, "Like when you flip a big rock over. The scent that comes up. Cool, musty." He shrugged and said, "Like that." Duiker said, "I know that smell, List. Tell me, these spirits, how strong are they?" List said, "Sormo says they're pleased, eager to play." Duiker said, "A spirit's game is a man's nightmare. Well, let's hope they take their play seriously." Duiker saw the massive refugees had been pushed off the Oxbow Island, across the ford road, to the south slope and swampy bed of the old Oxbow Channel. There were too many for the space provided, and he saw the far edge of the crowd creeping onto the hills beyond. A few had taken to the river, south of the ford, and were moving slowly out into the current. Duiker asked, "Who is in charge of the refugees?" List said, "Elements of the Crow clan. Coltane has his Wiccans oversee them. The refugees are as scared of them as they are of the apocalypse." Duiker thought, "And the Wiccans won't be bought either." "Yeah, that's right. Good luck, nobles."
Yeah. And again, Coltane needs to make the nobles arrow fodder. Do that, conscript the servants. Servants will be real loyal because being released for this insanity of trying to keep up appearances while we're fighting a running battle.
Yeah, the note that Nethpara's shirt was spotless says a lot about what is going on in his camp.
Yes.
Somehow, when everybody else looks like they're in rags, they're all dusty, this guy has water for laundry. How's that work?
Exactly. How does that work? Goodness. These guys are irritating.
The other noble wasn't that bad. Tumlet, it was really Nethpara that kind of sets the bad tone for the nobles.
Exactly. He's exactly what I think nobles are.
Yeah. List pointed to the east and exclaimed, "There, sir." Note how List is still calling him sir, even though Duiker told him not to.
Yeah. Very diligent.
He never stopped.
Yeah. Very diligent in helping Duiker, sir.
The enemy position that Duiker had ridden between the night before had begun moving. The Sialk and Hisari infantry were on the right, Hisari lancers on the left, and Tithanzi horse warriors down the center. The two mounted forces surged forward toward the Weasel clan's defenses. Mounted Wiccan bowmen accompanied by lancers rode out to meet them. But the thrust was a feint. The Hisari and Tithanzi wheeled west before engaging. Their commanders had misjudged, however, as the Wiccan bowmen had edged into range. Arrows flew, riders and horses fell. Then it was the turn of the Wiccan lancers to bolt forward in a sudden charge, and their enemy quickly withdrew back to their original positions. Duiker watched in surprise as the lancers pulled up, a number of them dismounting as their bowman kin covered them. Wounded enemy were summarily dispatched, scalps and equipment taken. Ropes appeared. Minutes later, the Wiccans rode back to their defenses, dragging the horse carcasses with them, along with a handful of wounded mounts they had managed to round up. That's wild. In the middle of a battlefield, they're doing this.
Yeah, and I love the order that this shows, that even while fighting and defending, there's a constant attention paid to supplies. And I know this would be an extremely valuable thing to know. Who is the Wiccan equivalent of Crap Game from Kelly's Hero? Don Rickles.
Oh, yeah.
The quartermaster.
The quartermaster?
Yeah.
We haven't met him yet.
No. I don't know if we ever meet the bridge burners.
We do.
Do we meet the quartermaster?
Oh, absolutely.
Crap Game and Oddball already have great Malazan call signs.
I always thought it was crap key for some reason.
Oh,
how do you spell it?
Crap game, like playing craps, like you're throwing dice.
Oh, crap game. Okay, yeah. I always thought it was crap key for some reason. I guess the way they say it real fast.
They say it real fast, yeah.
List said, the Wiccans feed themselves. They'll use the hides too, and the bones, and the tails and mane, and the teeth, and the Duergar cut him off. Got it. The enemy infantry continued their slow march.
Very thorough.
Okay, again with the Bill Cosby reference. Oh man,
I'm sorry. I didn't know if I could sneak that in with that attribution or not. Okay.
The enemy infantry continued their slow march. The Hisari and Tathanzi horse warriors had recovered and now made a slower, more cautious approach. List said, there's an old wall on the island. We could climb it and get a better view of all sides. If you don't mind walking on the backs of cattle to get there, that is. It's not as hard as it sounds. You just have to keep moving. Duergar raised an eyebrow. List said, honest, sir. Duergar said, all right, Corporal, lead the way. They took the roped road westward toward the ford. The old channel of the Oxbow was bridged by wooden slats, bolstered with new supports placed by the 7th Sappers. This avenue was maintained to allow for the movement back and forth of mounted messengers, but, as everywhere else, chaos reigned. Duergar held close in List's wake as the corporal weaved and danced his way down to the bridge. Beyond it rose the hump of the island and thousands of cattle. Duergar asked, where did this herd come from, as they reached the slatted crossing? List replied, purchased for the most part. Colton and his clans laid claim to land outside Hisar, then started buying up cattle, horses, oxen, mules, goats, just about anything on 4 legs. Duergar asked, when did all this happen? List said, about the same day they arrived. When the uprising came, most of the foolish dog clan was with the herds. The Tathanzi tribes thought to snatch the livestock and got their noses bloodied instead. That's impressive. Not only did Colton have the 7th preparing in the drills within the city, but he also had the foresight to start getting food for the march in order.
What a genius. I mean, it's like he's called this from the get-go. Like he's known what's going to happen.
Yeah, very impressive.
Yes, very, very.
As they neared the trailing end of the herd, the noise rose to a roar with shouting drovers, the bark of cattle dogs, solidly muscled, half-wild beasts born and bred on the Wiccan plains, the lowing of the cattle and the ceaseless rumbling thunder of their hooves. The dust cloud engulfing the river was impenetrable.
I'd forgot about these dogs.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's funny is they're not the biggest dogs on the block.
No. No, they're not.
We'll get more into that later in the book.
Oh, my word. I love it.
Duergar's eyes narrowed on the seething mass ahead. He said, not sure about your idea, Corporal. These beasts look jumpy. We're likely to get crushed in seconds flat. A shout from behind caught their attention. A young Wiccan girl was riding toward them. List said, Nether. Something in his tone pulled Duergar around. List was pale under his helmet. The girl, no more than 9 or 10, halted her horse before them. She was dark, her eyes like black liquid, her hair cut bristly short. Duergar recalled seeing her among Sormo's charges the night before. She said, you seek the wall as vantage. I will clear you a path. List nodded in response to Nether. Nether looked at Duergar and said, there is aspected magic on the other side, a lone god's warren. No divers, no soul taken. A tribe's god. Duergar said, Semk, the red blades are carrying word. He fell silent as he realized the import of her words, the significance of her presence at the meeting last night. He thought, one of the warlocks reborn. Sormo leads a clan of children empowered by lifetimes. I have a bit of trouble reconciling the age of the body she wears and her power level.
Right.
My daughter is about this age, and it boggles my mind to think that somebody that size could be the vessel of so much power.
Yeah. The only other person I can think of in fiction, of course, would be Aelia Atreides.
Yeah.
Very similar matter
So
than
it's
being
Paul's
youngsters.
younger sister who Jessica, Paul's mom, drank the water of the worm while she was pregnant, and then she was born as a Bene Gesserit, basically, right?
She was aware in the womb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For he is the Kwisatz Haderach.
He's the Kwisatz Haderach.
That was so creepy. That
What's great,
the
that
original Dune.
dude, that little girl is in some Italian horror movies I love too.
Oh yeah,
I think she's a doctor now, in all honesty. But I think she was. But yeah, as a kid, she did some Italian horror movies too.
Wow.
But I love that little girl, and especially in that, because I think we got to, especially with Dune Part 2 coming out. I'm really excited. I'm excited about anything Dune. That always moves the needle, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was watching Sicario the other day, and between the directing in that and then the writing, because that's Taylor Sheridan, he wrote that.
Okay.
And he's the one that wrote Hell or High Water and Wind River.
Oh yeah, I like Wind River.
I've talked about how the way he writes his movies, that's the type of movie that seems to be appealing to me more nowadays than in my youth. Is there's always this dark, ominous tone. For some reason, those are the types of movies that I really enjoy more nowadays.
Yeah, I gravitate toward those ominous, dark kind of picks as well. Yeah.
Nether said, I go to face them. The spirit of the land is older than any god. She guided her horse around the two men, then loosed a piercing cry. A clear avenue began to take shape. Animals pushed away to either side and moaned in fear. Nether rode down that aisle. After a moment, List and Duiker followed. As soon as they trod on the path, they could feel the earth shivering beneath their boots. Not the deep reverberations of countless hooves, but something more intense, muscular. Duiker thought, as if we stride the spine of an enormous serpent. The land awakened, the land eager to show its power. 50 paces ahead, the ridge of a weathered, vine-cloaked wall appeared. Evidently the remnant of an ancient fortification, it rose over a man's height and clear of the cattle. The path that Nether had created brushed one edge of it, then continued on down to the river. Nether rode on without glancing back. Moments later, List and Duiker reached the stone edifice and clambered up on its ragged but wide top. List pointed and said, Look south. Dust rose in a gold haze from the line of hills beyond the heaving mass of refugees. List said, Colting and his crows are in a fight. Duiker nodded and asked, There's a village on the other side of those hills, right? List said, Yes, sir. Len Barl, it's called. The scrap looks to be on the road linking it to the ford. We haven't seen the Sialk cavalry, so it's likely Rello sent them around to try and take our flank. Like Coltain always says, the man's predictable. Duiker faced north. The other side of the island consisted of marsh grasses filling the old Oxbow Channel. The far side was a narrow stand of dead leadwood trees, then a broad slope leading to a steep-sided hill. The regularity of that hill suggested that it was a tell. Commanding its flat plateau was an army, weapons and armor glinting in the morning light, heavy infantry. Dark banners rose amidst large tents behind two front-line legions of Tethanzi archers. The archers had begun moving down the slope. List said, That's chemist Rello and his hand-picked elites. He's yet to use them. To the east, the feints and probes between the Weasel clan's horse warriors and their Tethanzi and Hisari counterparts continued, while the Sialk and Hisar infantry steadily closed the distance to the Wiccan defenses. Behind these legions, the peasant army swirled in restless motion. Duiker said, If that horde decides to charge, our lines won't hold. List grimly said, They'll charge. If we're lucky, they'll wait too long and give us room to fall back. Duiker muttered, That's the kind of risk Hood loves. List said, The ground under them whispers fear. They won't be moving for a while. Duiker asked, Do I see control on all sides or the illusion of control? List's face twisted slightly. He said, Sometimes the two are one and the same, in terms of their effect, I mean. The only difference, or so Coltain says, is that when you bloody the real thing, it absorbs the damage, while the other shatters. Duiker shook his head and said, Who would have imagined a Wiccan war leader to think of war in such alchemical terms? And you, Corporal, has he made you his protege? List looked dour. He said, I kept dying in the war games. Gave me lots of time to stand around and eavesdrop.
Right.
He got informal tactical training from the genius himself.
Yes. That he becomes a Wiccan acolyte apprentice due to his love of Coltain, which I get. That guy commands respect for sure.
Probably List was terrified of him.
Oh yeah, but he also learned of. I think, especially if your life's been preserved for 3 months on the road by that man, you probably come to a worship of the guy almost.
By now, yes. I'm just saying back then
Oh yeah, back then he was terrified of that old boy.
when they were in the training exercise. Yes.
That's why
Mhm.
everything stuck with him too. I'm sure that's why List learned.
Right. The cattle were moving more quickly now, plunging into the stationary clouds of dust masking the ford. If anything, to Duerker's eyes, the heaving flow was too quick. He said, 4.5 feet deep, over 400 paces. Those animals should be crossing at a crawl. More, how to hold the herds to the shallows. Those dogs will have to swim, and the drovers will get pushed off to the deeps. And with all that dust, who can see a damn thing down there? List said nothing. Thunder sounded on the other side of the ford, followed by rapid percussive sounds. Columns of smoke pillared upward, and the air was suddenly febrile. Duerker thought sorcery, the Semp wizard priests, a lone child to oppose them. He snapped, "This is all taking too long. Why in Hood's name did it take all night just to get the wagons across? It will be dark before the refugees even move." List said, "They're closing." His face was covered in dust-smeared sweat. To the east, the Sialk and Hissar infantry had made contact with the outer defenses. Arrows swarmed the air. Weasel Clan horse warriors battled on two sides against Tethanzi lancers at the front and pike-wielding infantry on their right flank. They were struggling to withdraw. Holding the earthen defenses were Captain Lull's Marines, Wiccan archers, and a scattering of auxiliary units. They were yielding the first breastworks to the hardened infantry. The horde had begun to boil on the slopes beyond. To the north, the two legions of Tethanzi archers were rushing forward for the cover of the Leadwoods. From there, they would start killing cattle. There was no one to challenge them. Duerker said, "And so it shatters." List said, "You're as bad as Rello, sir." Duerker asked, "What do you mean?" List said, "Too quick to count us out. This isn't our first engagement." Faint shrieks shifted across from the Leadwoods. Duerker squinted through the dust. The Tethanzi archers screamed, thrashed about, and vanished from sight in the high marsh grasses beneath the skeletal trees. Duerker asked, "What in Hood's name is happening to those men?" List said, "An old, thirsty spirit, sir. Sormo promised it a day of warm blood, one last day, before it dies or ceases or whatever it is spirits do when they go." The archers had routed, their panicked flight taking them back to the slope beneath the tell. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that exchange with that spirit.
Absolutely not. Yeah, that sounds nasty.
List said, "There go the last of them." For a moment, Duerker thought the corporal referred to the Tethanzi archers. Then he realized with a start that the cattle were gone. He wheeled to face the ford, cursing at the tumbling clouds of dust. He muttered, "Too fast." The refugees had begun moving. Streamers of humanity flowing across the old Oxbow Channel and onto the island. There was no semblance of order, no way to control almost 30,000 exhausted and terrified people, and they were about to sweep over the wall where Duerker and the corporal stood. List said, "We should move." Duerker nodded and asked, "Where?" List said, east? To where the Weasel clan now covered the Marines and other footmen as they relinquished one earthen rampart after another, the soldiers falling back so quickly that they would be at the slatted bridge in minutes. Duerker thought, and then, up against this mob of shrieking refugees. Oh, Hood, what now? List seemed to read his mind and said, "They'll hold at the bridge. They have to. Come on." Their flight took them across the front of the leading edge of the refugees. The awakened land trembled beneath them, steam rising with a reek like muddy sweat. Here and there along the east edge of the island, the ground bulged and split open. Duerker's headlong sprint faltered. Shapes were clambering from the broken earth, skeletal beneath arcane, pitted, and encrusted bronze armor. Battered helms with antlers on their heads and long red-stained hair hanging in matted tufts down past their shoulders. The sound that came from them chilled Duerker's soul. He thought, laughter. Joyous laughter. Hood, are you twisting in affronted rage right now? List gasped. Nil, Nether's twin. That boy over there. Sormo said that this place has seen battle before. Said this Oxbow Island wasn't natural. Oh, Queen of Dreams, yet another Wiccan nightmare. The ancient warriors, voicing blood-curdling glee, were now breaking free of the earth all along the eastern end of the island. On Duerker's right and behind him, refugees screamed with terror. Their headlong flight staggered to a halt as the horrific creatures rose among them. Imagine being one of those refugees and these undead start crawling out of the ground.
Oh yeah, That's got to be really horrifying.
They've probably never seen anything like that before, right?
No, and you're already running for your life from an army that's chasing you. And then as you're running, I'm imagining these things are sprouting up from the ground amongst you. You wouldn't know that they're there to maybe help you because I'm assuming they're there to help the refugees because they're there at the behest of the Wiccans.
They don't know that.
That's what I'm saying. They don't know that. That's got to be horrifying.
Yeah. Imagine being a kid witnessing that.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I imagine it's Army of Darkness style. All those
Yes.
skeletons in armor come marching around. It's real classic.
Mhm.
It's real good Ray Harryhausen kind of stuff from like Sinbad era stuff.
Yeah, but the steaming ground opening up.
Steaming ground and warriors in armor and skeletal warriors in armor coming out of the ground.
Right. The Weasel clan and the footmen had contracted to a solid line this side of the bridge and channel. That line twitched and shuffled as the raised warriors pushed through their ranks, single-edged swords rising, the weapons almost shapeless beneath mineral accretions as they marched into the milling mass of the Hussar and Sialk infantry. The laughter had become singing, a guttural battle chant. Duerker and List found themselves in a cleared area pocked with smoldering broken earth. The refugees behind them withdrew as they pushed toward the ford, the rear guard before them finally able to draw breath as the undead warriors waded into their foe. The boy Nil, Nether's twin, rode a huge roan horse as he wheeled back and forth along the line, in one hand a feather-bedecked, knobbed club of some sort which he waved over his head. The undead warriors that passed near him bellowed and shook their weapons in salute or gratitude. Like them, Nil was laughing. Rello's veteran infantry broke before the onslaught and fell back to collide with the horde that had now checked its own advance. Duerker asked, "How can this be? Hood's Warren. This is necromantic, not..." List said, "Maybe they're not true undead. Maybe the island's spirit simply uses them." Duerker shook his head and said, "Not entirely. Hear that laughter, that song. Do you hear the language? These warriors have had their souls awakened. Those souls must have remained, held by the spirit, never released to Hood. We'll pay for this, Corporal, every one of us." Other refugees emerged from the ground on all sides. Women, children, dogs. Many of the dogs still wore leather harnesses, still dragged the remnants of travois. The women held their children to their bosoms, gripped the bone halves of wide-bladed bronze knives they then plunged into those children. An ancient final tragedy in frozen tableau, as a whole tribe faced slaughter at the hands of some unknown foe. Duerker thought, how many thousands of years ago did this happen? How long have these trapped souls held on to this horrifying, heart-rending moment? And now, are they doomed to repeat that eternal anguish? Duerker whispered, "Hood bless these, please, take them now." The women were locked in that fatal pattern. He watched them thrust daggers home, watched their children jerk and writhe, listened to their short-lived wails. He watched as the women then fell, heads crumpled to unseen weapons, to memories only they could see and feel. The remorseless executions went on and on. This is a dark, dark scene here.
Mm-hmm. This is a very dark scene. And this is also some real standout moments that stick with me from this, well, especially as we approach the break. We'll cover next week in particular some other real standout core memory stuff here. But this stands out a lot, though, as well. Just the idea of the spirits of the land, because everything else we've been introduced to in this world always has warrens and other things. And these spirits of the land are different. And we start seeing with the Wiccans that there's other types of magic. And it's not all the same thing. I like that.
Yeah. It's like he's got every type of magic covered.
Yes.
He's got hoodoo / voodoo.
Yeah.
He's got spirit magic. He's got sorcery magic.
Yeah. This kind of everything.
Nil had ceased his frenzied ride and now guided his roan at a walk toward the ghastly scene. The boy was sickly pale beneath his tan skin. Something whispered in Duerker's mind that the young warlock was seeing more than anyone else who was alive. The boy's head moved as he tracked ghost killers. He flinched at every death-dealing blow. Duerker, his legs as awkward as wooden crutches beneath him, stumbled toward Nil. He reached up and took the reins from the warlock's motionless hands. He quietly said, "Nil, what do you see?" Nil blinked, then slowly looked down to meet Duerker's gaze. He asked, "What?" Duerker said, "You can see. Who kills them?" Nil ran a trembling hand across his brow and said, "Who?" "Kin." The clan split. 2 rivals for the antlered chair. Kin, historian. Cousins, brothers, uncles. Duerker felt something breaking inside him at Nil's words. Half-formed expectations, held by desperate need, had insisted that the killers were Jaghut, Forkroll Assail, Kachane Chimau. He thought, someone other. Duiker said no. Nil's eyes, young yet ancient, held his as the warlock nodded. He said, kin. This has been mirrored. Among the Wick. A generation ago. Mirrored. Duiker said, but no longer. He thought, please. Nil managed a wry smile and said, no longer. The Emperor, as our enemy, united us. By laughing at our small battles, our pointless feuds. Laughing and more. Sneering. He shamed us with contempt, historian. When he met with Coltane, our alliance was already breaking apart. Kellanved mocked. He said he need only sit back and watch to see the end of our rebellion. With his words, he branded our souls. With his words and his offer of unity, he bestowed on us wisdom. With his words, we knelt before him in true gratitude, accepted what he offered us, and gave him our loyalty. You once wondered how the Emperor won our hearts? Now you know. That's amazing. We were wondering how Coltane had gone from the leader of a rebellion to having loyalty to the Malazan Empire. Yeah. And this helps shed some light on that.
It does. It sheds a lot of light on that subject, and it's very, very much needed and very much appreciated exposition.
Very dense.
Yes.
I liked it. Also, this notion that even kin can go to this level of violence toward each other just takes us back to that conversation about human nature that we had a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
It's always been there since the beginning.
Yeah. I think we're rascals at the best of times. So I mean, as a whole, I mean, there's individuals are not that way, but as a whole, we are definitely squirrely and not very nice to each other.
Yeah. And going back to the beginning of the episode, we were talking about a legacy and how it's the father's responsibility to try to pass on a legacy of the views and their beliefs to their children, their principles. And then hopefully they pass those on to their children as well.
Agreed.
And then we come to this and it's like, well, these people were family and they turned against each other. You know, you don't like to see it.
You don't. What's crazy, though, is there was a lot said there, too. The antlered throne. Is that the first throne?
Perhaps. I seem to remember some mention of the antlered throne later in the books, but I can't remember the specifics of it.
I can't either, but he mentions the Kachane Shamal. The Jaghut we've heard mentioned before, but the Assail, the Forquil Assail were mentioned again.
Yeah, we really don't know a lot about them yet, but that's at least the second or third time they've mentioned them.
Yes, and I forget that these are mentioned in this kind of throwaway, because it's just quite throwaway dialogue almost, like about, oh yeah, well, it's Forquil Assail, Kachane Shamal. You're like, wait, what, who?
That's one of the things I like about his books. He throws this out there. It's difficult on your first read through, but once you've been through it once, and then he's throwing this stuff out there, and then you have an expanded knowledge of it. You're like, oh, wow, all these little tidbits were always there.
Yes, I love that. I'm like you. That's part of that's what makes his writing so special.
I really like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first throne is a petrified bone monstrosity.
Okay.
So the antlered throne, it could very well be the same throne.
Okay.
They could have been fighting for the first throne.
Yeah. Because these were just humans here. Is that the assumption, is that these are humans?
Yeah, they didn't mention that they look like Talani Mass.
Yeah.
Which they have a heavier boned look to them.
Yeah. Yeah, because the Talan are the more primitive humans, correct?
Right.
Okay.
More robustly boned. They have really big, almost like Neanderthals a little bit. The pronounced ridged brow.
Yes, very much like that. That's what I think of. Yeah, especially because they're using flint weapons.
All right, so we're going to stop the chapter here. And we'll pick it up where we left off next week.
Yep. Great chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Just really getting warmed up, too. It's like,
yeah, not a ton of action yet. We had a little bit, but it was more dialogue heavy this time.
Yeah.
But we should have quite a bit next week.
Yes.
For standout moments, Duiker's ride into the camp.
Yes.
That's one of those core memories that's always stuck with me.
Agreed.
Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I agree on both sides. It's a core memory, and I enjoy it. I enjoyed everything about Duiker. He's a really cool dude.
The meeting with Coltane and the commanders. I especially enjoyed their treatment of the nobles.
Oh, yeah, and I really enjoy seeing them get mistreated in that command tent. It's really humorous in a twisted way because these guys, they're obviously getting hot baths here, even on the run.
Yeah, well, one of them is. He's got his nicely laundered dry cleaning.
Yeah, exactly.
He's worried about the children wasting away.
Oh, yeah, they're going to waste away.
Yeah.
The children.
I enjoyed Coltane telling Duiker that his stories are boring.
Right.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Oh,
It was cool to see the Wiccans looting on the battlefield mid-battle to gather whatever supplies they needed.
yes. And it just shows Coltane's brilliance and leaving nothing to waste.
I think that's more of a cultural thing for them. It's not necessarily Coltane's brilliance. I think that's probably how they do battle, huh?
It is, but it's a great thing to have here on this kind of battlefield.
Yes. And then finding out that the Wiccans were purchasing cattle and livestock from the moment they landed in 7 cities. Talk about planning ahead.
I had forgot just how much Coltane is just prepared for this, you know? He is on the run, yet he is calling the shots. Coltane! But Coltane, love that man. He's starting. The legend is starting.
It is. List getting a front row seat to tactical tutorials by getting knocked out during the training exercises. That was great.
Yeah, and I had forgot that he had learned how to be such a good soldier by watching the Wiccans.
Proximity.
Yeah.
If people are willing to improve and take on advice from people or learn from what they're doing, then yeah, they will definitely pick up on it and improve.
Yeah. Great stuff there.
The dark scene of the tortured souls reliving the nightmare of slaughter from thousands of years ago, that was tough to get through.
It is. It's a really, again, it's a real core memory here, but I agree, it's real dark, and I love that. So this is not the only trapped thing here in this world. I think there's other scenes, other tableaus equally as poignant as dark, I think, as we'll discover in this series, I think. If I'm not mistaken, there's more. It's fantastic. I mean, there's always history, and there's always history of tragedy in Erikson's world. It's because it mirrors our world, which is how he, as we know how he's been trained. He looks at the world this way from the
world is layers
Yeah.
upon layers of history. There's always something under there.
That's right. And I enjoy that I like that he's always going to uncover a little bit that we're never going to know anything about, but that's what makes it so intriguing. It's him not answering every question. I don't need everything fed to me. I like a certain enigmas and riddles left as they are sometimes in stories.
Yeah, because it lets your imagination run wild. Like, oh, it could be this, it could be that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always cool.
I like that.
I enjoyed finding out that Kellanved won the Wiccans over by laughing at their petty squabbles with each other.
That's too funny. And Kellanved, what an intriguing. I would like to know more about him because he's obviously was a heck of a. He could sure read the room, apparently.
Maybe some of Esselmon's books. Like I haven't read any of that new trilogy that he's working on.
That's true.
The Deadhouse Landing stuff.
I think the last book of that just came out, if I'm not mistaken.
If it's not out now, it'll be out soon, very soon.
Because I own the first two. I haven't bought them yet, but the only thing I've read about Kellanved in particular was Knight of Knives.
Right. But they weren't really in that much.
No, they really weren't. I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be the Kellanved dancer story. And it kind of is, but it's not what I was expecting. And that's okay. Esselmonte, he's a good writer too, man. I'm not going to slight him. He ain't Erikson, but he's good. He's better than Sanderson.
I haven't read any Sanderson, so I can't compare.
I take that back. I think you're right. What little bit I've tried, I didn't like. What I've read about, I've at least read 4 or 5 of Esselmonte, and I've enjoyed what I've read so far. I think Knight of Knives was the one I liked the least.
Really? Did you read Assail and Blood and Bone?
I don't. I forget where I am now. I'm in the one where they're slogging through the jungle, man. It's that we've talked about this as you said. You got kind of bogged down in that one.
That's Blood and Bone, I think.
Blood and Bone. Okay, and I'm enjoying everything about it, but I'm just kind of stuck in there. I'm stuck in the slog in that one. I haven't made it out of there yet.
It does feel like a slog.
Yeah.
That's a tough one to get through.
It is, but
Assail kind of feels the same way too.
Okay. I've liked a lot of the info that you get out of it, and there's been some cool stuff that's happened. I mean, Esselmonte had some great stories in there.
Yeah, Stonewielder and Return of the Crimson Guard were good books. Like I really liked those two of his books.
I did enjoy those.
When it started branching further out with the I guess Orb Scepter Throne was pretty decent too.
Yeah.
But then I did feel like Blood and Bone was a slog, and then Assail also.
Okay.
They were kind of hard to get through, but I had to finish them just to get to the conclusion of what he was setting up there.
I've got to do the same. I got to get through it just to see what's being set up because it's what these gentlemen have worked on. I want to know. I want to know what they've come up with. It's well worth following.
Yeah. All right, great job tonight, Billy.
Great show.
You got any final thoughts before we drop off here?
Just a really great show. I'm really excited to finally be on the Chain of Dogs, man. So much craziness, awesomeness, madness that goes on here. I'm glad to finally be getting into this part of the story.
Next week's episode is going to be pretty heavy on the action and quite a bit of stuff going on. And that's the last part of book 2 before we get into the Chain of Dogs, book 3.
Yeah.
Should be exciting.
I'm really excited, man.
All right, everybody. We will be releasing this episode on Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate it. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See y'all next week, everybody.
We thank you all for joining us today.
Again, we really like to thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we've had a really great time talking about the topic today.
If you would like to support our show, you can find us at horsefrogproductions.com, where you can find our Patreon link. Depending on the platform you're listening from, it may also be in the episode description.
And if you'd like to contact us through email, it's at contact@horsefrogproductions.com.